Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a very significant day for everyone on the island of Ireland, for our neighbouring island, and for all our fellow members of the European Union. Following long and intensive negotiations, we've reached a satisfactory conclusion on the issues relating to Ireland in Phase 1. As you know, the Irish issues were one of three critical areas that needed to be dealt with in these talks before the European Union and United Kingdom could proceed to the Phase 2 issues, such as trade and the new political and economic relationship that will exist between the United Kingdom and the European Union. The other two issues, which are also important for the EU and for Ireland, are citizens' rights and the financial settlement. We have achieved all that we set out to achieve in Phase 1 of these negotiations. We have the assurances and guarantees we need from the United Kingdom and support for them from the European Union. I am satisfied that sufficient progress has now been made on the Irish issues. The parameters have been set and they are good. Now we can move on to work out the detail of what has been agreed, to talk about the transition phase, free trade and the new relationship between the EU and the UK. This is not the end, but it is the end of the beginning, and we will remain fully engaged and vigilant throughout Phase 2, the drafting and ratification of the new treaties that will be required between the EU and the UK and their implementation. So what's been achieved? First of all, the Good Friday Agreement in all its parts is protected. Secondly, everyone born in Northern Ireland will continue to have the right to Irish and therefore EU citizenship. So a child born in Belfast or Derry today will have the right to study in Paris, to buy property in Spain, to work in Berlin or any other parts of the European Union. All they have to do is exercise their right to Irish and EU citizenship. Third, the common travel area will continue, allowing us to travel freely between Britain and Ireland. British and Irish citizens will continue to have the freedom to live, work, study, access housing, healthcare, pensions and welfare in each other's countries as though we were citizens of both. Fifth, the United Kingdom is committed to avoiding a hard border as an overarching requirement with which any future arrangements must be compatible. There will be no physical infrastructure or related checks or controls. Three options have been set out as to how this can be achieved. Our preferred option is, of course, a deep and comprehensive agreement between the EU and the UK in its entirety, which will allow us to trade as we do now. However, that might not be possible, so there is a backstop arrangement in place, in which Northern Ireland and perhaps all of the United Kingdom will maintain full alignment with the rules of the internal market and customs union, which are relevant to the avoidance of a border, north-south cooperation and the all-island economy. Sixth, people and businesses in Northern Ireland are being given the additional assurance that the United Kingdom government will ensure that Northern Ireland business will continue to have unfettered access to the whole of the UK and that no new barriers will develop between Northern Ireland and Great Britain unless the Northern Ireland Executive and Assembly agree to it. Northern Ireland and Great Britain will not drift apart. Seventh, peace and interreg funding, which is so valuable to our border communities, will continue through to 2021, and we will all favourably examine continuing it beyond that. Eighth, the United Kingdom has committed to ensuring that in Northern Ireland there is no diminution of the human rights, safeguards and equality of opportunity that's set out in European law. And finally, there will continue to be a distinct strand on Ireland in the Phase 2 of these negotiations. I hope soon to see the restoration of the Northern Ireland Executive and the North-South Ministerial Council. These institutions will be a vital voice as we move forward together into Phase 2 of the Brexit talks. I want in particular this morning to recognise the concerns of the unionist community in Northern Ireland, and I want to assure you that the Irish government has no hidden agenda. There is no question of us trying to exploit Brexit as a means of moving towards a united Ireland without consent. We do not want to see a border in the Irish Sea, any more than we want there to be a border between Newry and Dundalk or between Letterkenny and Derry. We want to build bridges, not borders. and we want free travel and free trade to continue as it does now and has done for the past 20 years. We want reconciliation and respect to grow. Our guiding light and our only ambition throughout has been to ensure that the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement continue to operate in full after Brexit, and that people can go about their normal lives and businesses as before and just as they have done for the past 20 years. In particular, the agreement we've reached explicitly recognises the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement with regard to the constitutional status of Northern Ireland and the principle of consent. This principle is the foundation stone of the new relationships that we've built on this island since 1998 and will continue to build into the future. To the nationalist people in Northern Ireland, I want to assure you that we have protected your interests throughout these negotiations and will continue to do so. Your birthright as Irish citizens, and therefore as Europeans, has been protected. There will be no hard border on our island, and you will never again be left behind by an Irish government. These rights will of course be available to everyone in Northern Ireland who chooses to exercise his or her right to be an Irish citizen, regardless of their political persuasion or religious beliefs. In conclusion, I want to thank my colleagues in government, the officials and diplomats in the Department of the Taoiseach and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and especially the Taoiseach and Minister for Foreign Affairs, Simon Coveney, and the Minister for European Affairs, Helen McEntee, for their hard work and commitment in the months gone by. The government has been united and firm in its resolve. I'd also like to thank the opposition leaders for the very practical support they have offered in recent months, both to the government and by using their contacts with sister parties across Europe. I also want to recognise the EU negotiators, led by Michel Barnier, as well as President Tusk and President Juncker, and my fellow heads of state and government. Their solidarity has been invaluable, and it was beyond what we hoped for. It is, to me, the clearest possible illustration of the values of the European Union and why small countries are better off in the EU. And it puts beyond any doubt that our future lies in the European Union, at the heart of the common European home that we helped to build. Finally, to our neighbours in Britain, to the Prime Minister and her colleagues, I thank you for your careful consideration of our concerns, your goodwill and good faith. I know that the Irish issues are on your agenda, but they are among many challenges that Brexit poses for your country and your people. Ireland has always respected your democratic decision to leave the European Union, and we've always shared common interests in peace, free trade, in free movement and prosperity for everyone on these islands. And I can assure you of the continued friendship and goodwill of the Irish government and Irish people in the months and years ahead. Táid tar éis gacha bhí leagtha amach a going a bhaint amach I ggéim a héin don idirbheartaíocht. Tá na dearbhútha agus na ráíochta a bhíúing ón riachtaonta agus tacaíocht dóibh ón Aontas Orpach. Tá go leor dul chun cinn buint amach, tá na pramadéir sucrtha agus tá siad go maith. Inis is féidirling boga ar aig chun na míon sonratha a obrú amach agus plé a dhéanamh ar an céim astratha, ar saor chráideáil agus ar an cadribh nua idir an Aontas Orpach agus an riachtaonta. Ní hé seo an deire, ach is deire an tosach é. Beimid ag fannacht go thomláin, gníomhach agus áireach I rith an dara céim. An scríbhneoireacht agus an dainniú na conirthaí nua a bheas riachtanach idir an Aontas Orpach agus an riachtaonta agus iad a chur I bhain. Gur míle maigad.
Taoiseach, is this politically bulletproof, the guarantees that you've received? And also Donald Tusk said today this was the easier task. We're now going into phase 2. How concerned are you considering how this wasn't very easy in the end?
Yeah, they are politically bulletproof. They're cast iron. If you see the language that's there in the paragraphs, it talks about commitment to avoiding a hard border, there being no physical infrastructure, no associated checks and controls, and that commitment is overarching and stands in all circumstances. So the strongest commitment that exists in this document is that political commitment that there will be no hard border. I think the President is quite correct. This is phase 2, as I said earlier. It's the end of the beginning, but we now need to move on to phase two. And of course, after phase two, there is the very complicated process of negotiating one or maybe two treaties between the European Union and the EU. So the way we saw phase one was making sure that we narrowed the parameters within which agreement can be made, that we got the guarantees and assurances that we needed, and we have those now, but this will continue for months and even years. But we've protected what we wanted to protect, assuring citizens' rights, the common travel area, ensuring that there wouldn't be a hard border on our island.
Next question to Sean from Utah.
Taoiseach, Ministers, have you spoken to Arlene Foster about this deal, and what is so different about it to the text on Monday that has made it acceptable to the DUP?
Yeah, I haven't spoken directly to Arlene. The way the negotiations were structured is that it's a negotiation between the EU task force on the one side and the UK government on the other. We have had some bilateral talks with the UK government, but we respected the process that was agreed to at the start as to how this negotiation would work, and that doesn't involve political parties. It involves the European Union and sovereign governments. In terms of the changes that were made between Monday and today, many were stylistic. They were changes in language or just statements of fact, which we'd no difficulty with. And the one change I think of significance is the new paragraph 50, which is an assurance that the United Kingdom is giving to people and businesses in Northern Ireland, that the United Kingdom will ensure that there are no barriers to trade between Northern Ireland and Britain, and that Northern Ireland businesses will still have unfettered access to the rest of the UK, to GB, in those backstop scenarios. And that's something we're comfortable with. Had that been there on Monday, we would have consented to it. So the fact it was added in is something that we're very happy to welcome. And you'll have heard me saying before, on Monday and even before that we don't want to see a border in the Irish Sea any more than we want to see a border between Newry and Dundalk, or between Letterkenny and Derry. And that paragraph is put in to assure people in Northern Ireland and businesses in Northern Ireland that Northern Ireland won't drift apart from Great Britain, and we're absolutely satisfied that is included and should be included.
One question.
Taoiseach, since Theresa May took over as Prime Minister of the UK, the indications were very much that we were heading towards a hard Brexit between her conference speech, her Lancaster House speech. Do you think that this document today points that we are now heading towards a soft Brexit along the lines of you have campaigned for and many in the UK have campaigned against?
Yeah, I think it's I think that's really a matter for the United Kingdom, for them to decide what type of Brexit they want to have. Our job as the Irish government and my job as Taoiseach is to protect our national interests, and they involve protecting the rights of people in Northern Ireland, EU citizens in Northern Ireland. It involves avoiding a hard border. It involves the common travel area, ensuring citizens' rights remain between Ireland and Britain, and all of those things. And we've protected what we sought to protect and achieved what we sought to achieve. We will now get into a lot more detail, and I think the fact that we're talking in terms of regulatory alignment and full regulatory alignment, I think is very helpful, because whatever new relationship exists between the EU and the UK, if we're going to have free and unfettered free trade, then by definition you're going to have to play by the same rules. Connected to free trade is the principle that you trade on a level playing field. You don't have free trade, unfettered free trade, with a country that has lower health standards or lower environmental standards or inferior labour laws or different safety standards. So connected to unfettered free trade is regulatory alignment, and I think that's the kind of detail we're going to get into in the months. Yeah, I think things are very much moving in the right direction. We don't, Brexit is a British policy. We never wanted Brexit to happen. So obviously it's in our interest that the Brexit that does happen, and it is going to happen, is as soft as it can be. But ultimately that's going to be a matter for the UK government. But also I think we're going to be getting away from this simple binary soft or hard Brexit idea. We're actually now getting into the detail. And I think as we get into the detail more and more, the British public and British people will come to understand why it makes sense, actually, that we have very similar or almost identical rules and regulations when it comes to trade, because that's what facilitates free trade, is the fact that we do have the same standards.
Next question to Darren McCaffrey from Sky. Taoiseach, the last time I heard... Darren from Sky News. The last time I heard the phrase cast iron guarantee, it was David Cameron promising a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. And the DUP this morning have said that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and how we vote on the final deal would depend on its contents. So ultimately, what you have agreed today isn't cast iron. The UK could still crash out of the European Union. Politicians do go back on the words. So this is just a principled agreement, really, isn't it? And second of all, we've had a lot of talk this week. A lot of people have said things. Just how damaging has this week been for Anglo-Irish and North-South relations?
Well, this is an agreement on the one part by the European Union, of which Ireland is a member, and on the other part by the United Kingdom. And speaking on behalf of Ireland and the European Union, I can absolutely guarantee people that we will abide by this agreement. And I don't have any reason to think that the British government and the UK government won't abide by this agreement. So this agreement, this report, sets the parameters for further talks, and I'm confident that the political guarantees that exist in this are rock solid. And certainly from our side, from the side of Ireland, from the side of the European Union, we will absolutely uphold what we've agreed to here today. Sorry, the second part of the question? Oh yeah. I'll be very frank. Brexit, by its nature, has strained relations between Ireland and the UK. Of course it has. How could it not? But our role now is to make sure that we get through that and that we re-establish the close friendship that should exist between Britain and Ireland and between the British and Irish governments. And I actually think because of this agreement that we have today, because we've been given the guarantees and assurances that we sought, I think that in the months and years ahead, Britain will have no closer friend than Ireland when it comes to future negotiations and the final treaties.
Arthur Beasley, followed by Sharon Murray.
Taoiseach, so you were saying that you were confident this agreement made by Theresa May this morning will stick come what may in her engagements with the hard Brexiteers in her party. Secondly, what is the reason for the need for a distinct Irish strand in the second phase of the talks? If all of the Irish issues have now been settled to your full satisfaction, why do we need a distinct phase in round two? Thank you.
Well, the answer first question is yes. Yes, I do. I'll ask the Taoiseach to answer the question about why we sought a dedicated Irish stream throughout phase two.
Yeah, no, I think what this whole agreement is about is to try and provide reassurance to people that the fears that have been held in terms of the consequences of Brexit, perhaps unintended consequences, because, for example, nobody wants or is advocating for a hard border. But the fear was that we wouldn't be able to prevent it in the context of trying to figure out a trade arrangement. And that's why we needed the guarantees of a backstop, fallback position, if you like, in the absence of any other agreed solution that would guarantee the avoidance of a hard border. But I think that a lot of Irish people will get reassurance knowing that as we move into phase two, as in phase one, there will be a specific Irish stream because there's a recognition that Ireland is more vulnerable, more exposed to the fallout of Brexit than any other European country, geographically because of where we're placed. The interwoven relationship that Ireland has with Britain, which is such a close one, that because of that, in phase one, the Irish issues were quite specific and needed to be addressed in order to move on to phase two. And before any final agreement can be signed off on, there will be a specific Irish stream in phase two also that will ensure that the Irish issues don't simply get lumped into the pot with a whole load of other issues and therefore don't get the focus and the priority that they need. So we insisted on ensuring that the structure of phase two would mirror, in some ways, from an Irish point of view, the structure in phase one, whereby there would be a specific workout of an Irish set of quite unique issues to ensure that they're fully addressed. And I hope that people will be reassured by that. So in the same way as Ireland has been one of the last things to be resolved to allow us to move on to phase two, In phase 2, there will be specific Irish issues that will also need to be addressed. And as the Taoiseach said, I think you'll find actually that Ireland and Britain will in many ways have quite a similar outlook in terms of the outcome that we'd like to see, which is a very comprehensive free trade agreement or partnership that allows trade to be maintained. Let's not forget we have a €65 billion trade relationship with Britain. We have 38,000 companies trading with Britain from Ireland every single week. We have 200,000 jobs linked to that. So phase 2 is important for Ireland. We want to move on to it, but we also want to have a specific Irish stream in phase 2 to deal with the specific and quite unique Irish issues linked to Brexit.
Yeah, what are the implications of this agreement on the future trading relationship with the EU? And also, are you confident now there will be a transitional period agreed? Will that involve the 4 freedoms, including freedom of movement?
I'm confident that there will be a transition arrangement. I think everyone wants it. The UK side prefers to use the term implementation period, but what you call it doesn't matter. What matters is what it is. So I am confident that there will be a transition period. That's something we support, something that Taoiseach Kenny actually was one of the first to propose in his Mansion House speech some time ago. And we want that transition phase for 2 reasons. Really so that individuals and businesses can plan ahead for any long-term changes that might take place. The detail and content of what that transition phase is going to involve is a matter for phase 2. But I look forward to us agreeing in Brussels next week that we are moving on to phase 2, and we'll work that out.
Taoiseach, just on that transitional period, the EU draft guidelines this morning has envisaged a period of around 2 years. Is it still the government's position that it should be longer than that, and how long do you think it should be?
Well, 2 years would bring us through to March 2021, so that's a decent time period ahead. So we would be happy for it to be longer. We're also comfortable with 2 years because it's 2 years from the date of exit. So that 2 years brings us to spring of 2021, which is more than 3 years away now. So it's a decent amount of time. I would add the one word of caution to having a transition phase of 2 years. Obviously, what we're going to want to do is to negotiate new treaties. It's going to be required that there be a new association treaty or some form of treaty between the United Kingdom and the EU, possibly 2 treaties, one dealing with economic and trade matters and a different one dealing with security, defence and issues such as that. It takes time to negotiate treaties. Never mind how long it took to negotiate Maastricht or the Lisbon Treaty or you name it, how long it's taken to negotiate CETA, for example. So our experience and my experience is it can take many years to negotiate treaties, and I would have thought it would be in everyone's interest to make sure that the transition phase or implementation period is long enough to write those treaties. And then bear in mind they all have to be ratified, not just by the EU at EU level and the United Kingdom. They have to be ratified by potentially all the individual member states' national parliaments and the European Parliament. So negotiating these treaties will take time, and how long the transition phase should be, in my view, must be linked to how long will it take us to negotiate those treaties and secure ratification for them across 27 remaining member states.
Taoiseach, just to get you to elaborate on an answer you gave to Fiach earlier on, we now have the UK and its 4 components will be one market, indivisible, and we'll have Ireland and the EU 27 as another market, indivisible. And if we're to avoid a border or any kind of divergence, we have to have this alignment, as you call it. Does that effectively mean that even if the UK as a whole is not within the customs union and the single market, that it is going to have to honour the rules and obligations of the single market anyway?
Perhaps not all of them. The United Kingdom's indicated that it's leaving the European Union, the single market and the customs union, and we accept and respect that that's the decision of the United Kingdom. But at the same time, the United Kingdom, just like us, wants to maintain free trade. And the only way you can have free trade is if you agree that there's a level playing field. You can't have free trade if one country can subsidise its factories and the country is trading with can't. You can't have free trade if one country has different food safety standards than a different country. You can't really have free trade. if one country can undercut the others by having inferior labour laws and protections. So linked to unfettered free trade is having a fair and level playing field, and that's really what regulatory alignment is all about. So that's what's indivisible, really, and I think it's understood and appreciated in the United Kingdom that in order to have free trade with this massive market of 440 million people that's on Britain's doorstep, there will need to be regulatory alignment, not in all things, but a full and ongoing regulatory alignment.
Taoiseach, you were highlighting the structures of Phase 2. Could you perhaps give us some of the priorities from the Irish perspective for Phase 2? What are we seeking? What's on the top of the list? And are you essentially saying, when you talk about treaty change, Irish people will essentially, when all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed on the trade deal, Irish people will essentially have a Brexit referendum?
Probably won't be necessary to have a referendum. We concluded CETA, for example, with Canada, very deep agreement with Canada without the need for a referendum, and we have the European Economic Area with Switzerland, Norway, other places. So it probably won't require a referendum. It would only require a referendum if it affected our constitution in some way, and I don't envisage that being the case. But it will require, I'm certain it will require, parliamentary ratification by the European Parliament and 27 other national parliaments, and any one of those could potentially hold it up, and that is going to be a big challenge. One of the great things about being in the European Union is that we do agree things, sometimes by majority vote and by qualified majority. When you get back to more traditional inter-sovereign relationships, you need all 27 agreeing, and that is going to produce, I think, a real challenge for the United Kingdom in achieving these treaties, but we'll work with them to try and achieve that. In terms of our objectives for Phase 2, obviously trade is going to be a big one for us. We want the trading relationship to continue more or less as it is now, not just north-south, but also east-west. If you're a farmer, if you're an agri-food, if you're an exporter, importer, if your job depends on trade with Britain, you're going to want free trade to continue. So that's a big thing for us. Having an adequate transition phase that allows people to adjust and allows enough time to negotiate new treaties, that's going to be important too. What will also be important is things like aviation. The United Kingdom at the moment is part of the single European sky, and that's what facilitates so many flights in and out of Britain, not just to Ireland, but to other parts of the world. And we want those kind of things to continue. And obviously they'll have other interests as well. The UK will have particular interests around defence and security, which we'll be less interested in, but that'll be important to them as well. Do you want to add anything on Phase 2?
I suppose there's an irony in the fact that the result that we want after all of these negotiations is as close to the status quo as possible. But that is what we want. I've often said, and the Taoiseach and Helen has often said as well, that actually when it comes to Phase 2, Ireland will be quite a close friend of Britain, I think, on most of the things that they want. I mean, Britain wants a very comprehensive and very ambitious trade arrangement with the European Union and the single market. We want that too, because a strong British economy is good for Ireland, and the absence of trade barriers between Britain and Ireland and between Britain and the European Union is good for Ireland. Don't forget, whether it's Irish SMEs selling to British consumers, or whether it's big multinationals here that have footprints in Britain and Ireland that interact with each other all of the time, we don't want anything to interrupt that. And I believe that most people in Britain don't want that kind of trade interruption either. We have sensitive areas too that we will need to work really hard on in the context of Phase 2. Obviously agriculture and agri-food is a big one, but so too is fishing, which I think will be a very complicated part of the Phase 2 negotiations, because first of all, it's very fishing negotiations at the best of times are complicated, but in the context of the European Union leaving and its sovereign territory at sea leaving the European Union, I think that will be a particularly complex part of Phase 2 negotiations. But Ireland will be involved in all of that, listening to our people, our industries, and obviously working with Britain to try and find a way forward that everybody can live with.
A question for the Taoiseach. It's coming back to the points made by Arthur and by Darren here. How on earth is it possible to square this circle? There's still, I'm puzzled by how you can reconcile a situation where the UK will remain in the internal market and the customs union, and Ireland will have full regulatory alignment with the North. Is the key in this paragraph 49, and it's to do with punctuation, that in the absence of agreed solutions, the United Kingdom will maintain full alignment with those rules of the internal market and the customs union which support North-South cooperation? Is it sectoral? Because just to pick up on one of the answers you gave earlier, you said there will not be a need to have regulatory alignment, not in all things. Is it sectoral? Can you give us clarity on that?
I think we're probably going to spend a lot of time in the months and years ahead talking about squares and circles. It is the nature of these negotiations, and often when I speak to Theresa May, that's exactly the term that I use. In fact, is how are we going to square the circle? It's important always to remember that what you're talking about is the backstop. We hope it doesn't come to the backstop. What we want, as does the United Kingdom, is a new, deep and comprehensive agreement, a treaty covering free trade and customs with the UK that isn't very difficult or isn't very different from the status quo when it comes to trade. The backstop is where you get into the area that you're talking about. It's in the absence of an agreement what happens. So in the absence of an agreement, the UK is committing to maintain full alignment with those rules of the internal market and the customs union, which now or in the future support North-South cooperation, the all-island economy and the protection of the 1998 agreement. So that doesn't mean that in this backstop scenario that Northern Ireland or the UK has to stay in the internal market or the customs union. It doesn't mean that, but it does have to maintain full alignment with the rules of the internal market and the customs union where it matters in terms of there being a border, North-South cooperation, the all-island economy. So it's not an absolute, but it is there and very strong.
Paragraph 49 is irreconcilable with paragraph 50. If you've got alignment east-west, and the east, the UK is different. How can you have alignment north-south?
No, it's not. It's not
yeah.
No, it's not irreconcilable because paragraph 50 is a commitment on behalf of the United Kingdom that the United Kingdom, which will be outside the European Union at that stage, will be free to continue to allow unfettered access to Great Britain for Northern Ireland business and Northern Ireland people. So in that kind of backstop scenario, you essentially have a specific solution or a special arrangement for Northern Ireland, which allows them to continue to trade freely with the EU, but also Britain taking its sovereign decision to make sure there's no barriers to trade either between Northern Ireland and Britain. So ironically, that backstop scenario is actually a very good house for Northern Ireland. But that's not where we expect things to end up. We expect to be able to negotiate a new EU-UK treaty which will allow free trade to continue between all of the UK and the European Union.
Taoiseach, I wonder what you think Wales and Scotland and even London will make of this deal. Nicola Sturgeon's already tweeted this morning that whatever special arrangements are made for Northern Ireland should be made available to all the others.
Yeah, look, that's a matter of internal UK politics, which I'd be wise and advised not to comment on, so I won't. I suppose the only thing that I would say is that the fact that we saw on Monday and perhaps are again seeing today, Scotland and potentially other countries like Wales or London looking for the same arrangements of Northern Ireland, I hope sends a very clear message to the people in Northern Ireland, in both communities, Catholic and Protestant, Unionist and Nationalist, that this is actually a very good deal for you. And we've done a lot of work making sure that even the worst case scenario, the backstop option, is a good outcome for Northern Ireland. And I'd really like people in Northern Ireland just to set aside some of those historical differences and old-fashioned tribal divisions and look at what's here and see that it is a very good outcome for Northern Ireland in any circumstance.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.